There's this saying that says, tough times produce strong men produce good times produce weak men produce tough times.
Yes.
If that's the truth, which phase are we in today?
Well, if you think about it historically, you have to say that we're in good times. I mean, that doesn't mean everything about the current times are good, and of course life is always tenuous and difficult, but it's 1919. If you go back 100 years ago, imagine what the last 5 years would have been like, right? The entire world was encapsulated in a terrible war. The trench warfare was absolutely brutal, and that was a 5-year period, and then that was followed by the Spanish influenza, which killed 120 million people, and so I'd rather be here now than there then by a substantial margin. And I think life is never easy, even under relatively positive conditions. But I would say that it's very difficult to make the case that we're not in good times. And I especially think that's true if you look at the world globally. The American working class, and maybe the Western working class in general, paid a very large price for enriching the rest of the world. China's come up in a miraculous way in the last 40 years. South Korea, India, while all of Southeast Asia, and increasingly Africa too, because the fastest growing economies in the world are now in sub-Saharan Africa. And that's produced a tremendous competition for working class people in the West. But speaking on a global level, there's never been a better time for the majority of people to be alive. And the future, although we're vulnerable and terrible things can always happen to us, it's hard to make a case that the future doesn't look comparatively positive. We're becoming extremely technologically sophisticated, and the world is changing at an incredibly rapid rate, and the only way we're going to be able to manage that in a positive way is if each of us, or as many of us as possible, are capable of making wise and careful and truthful decisions. And if we do that, then maybe things can continue to improve. The rate of absolute poverty in the world has fell by 50% between the year 2000 and the year 2012. That's the fastest rate of economic improvement in the history of the world, and there's plenty of reason to be optimistic if you're inclined in that direction. I would say it's best to marry that with a healthy dose of attentive caution because, well, as I said, things can go badly wrong. But I can't think of a time in the past that I would trade for now, despite all the problems that are also part and parcel of being alive now.
So do you think these good times will produce weak men, or you don't buy that? You think in any times we're going to have weak, strong people being produced?
Well, I think there is a certain danger in luxury. We don't know how necessary a certain degree of privation is to motivation. The typical first-generation immigrant story is someone arrives with nothing and is motivated fully to do whatever is necessary to make either themselves or their children a success. And that does seem to decline. That motivation does seem to decline somewhat over the following generations. So, for example, Asian immigrants, their children outperform American children in school by a substantial margin, but that disappears by about 3 generations. That advantage.
Wow, that disappears in 3 generations.
Yeah. As the Asian immigrants become more Americanized, their proclivity to excel academically.
You guys understand that concept? Powerful. So I come first generation, I'm more disciplined. My kid becomes less disciplined. My grandkids become less disciplined, and the one prior to that, past that also gets less disciplined.
Yeah, well, like I said, and you probably face this to some degree because you have a lot of resources at your command. It's very difficult to provide your children with optimal privation in order to make them stand on their own 2 feet. And you don't get people to stand up on their own 2 feet and to adopt responsibility if everything is given to them. And that's a real conundrum. Well, it's a real conundrum as you become successful, because you're in a situation where if your children ask you for something, there's no formal reason for you to say no, because you can provide whatever is being requested. But by doing that, you steal from them the opportunity to generate that for themselves. And that's, I suppose, one of the dangers of, one of the dangers of prosperity. What that does to people over the long run, I don't think we understand well yet, because most people haven't been prosperous for very long, right? There's been plenty of privation to go around, and of course there still is in many, many parts of the world, including in the United States and in the West.